to Solving for the Undefined podcast. I'm your host, Johanna, founder of Miss Kuiper's Classroom, the place that equips teachers in creating a healthy math classroom where students can thrive, no matter their academic abilities. But it's not always about the numbers, and that's why I'm here, bringing you the formulas to solve your problems, math and otherwise, plus strategies on cultivating that necessary math mindset. And that's what you can count on. Hello, welcome to a brand new episode. Today's episode is the second in a 5-part series on how to better engage all of your students, no matter their academic abilities. Last week we talked about what scaffolding is and why it's important. Make sure you've listened to that because it's the foundation for today's episode. As we begin talking about how to make learning accessible for your students, I need to address something. Even if the learning is accessible, if it's not engaging, it will be meaningless. And that's not what we want. So today I will be sharing 5 ways to engage your students in the math classroom. And trust me when I say that this is not your typical list. When I say engagement, what is the first word that pops into your head? For me, it was always fun or interactive. But it's a myth that engagement equals fun. Sometimes it does, but fun isn't an inclusive definition. Engagement can be disguised as feedback, cooperative learning, project-based learning, math tasks, interactive activities, etc. But why is engagement important? Well, according to some research, for every 2% disengagement rises, pass rates on assessments drop by 1%. And we'll get to assessments in another episode, but think about that statistic. The higher the lack of engagement, the lower the comprehensive understanding will be, or at least shown on an assessment will be. And I know it's easy to blame curriculum, the students, the pandemic, and that's not to say they don't have an effect on students. They absolutely do. But those are not the only pieces of the puzzle. To move students towards comprehensive understanding or towards mastery, however you want to define it, the determining factor is you, the teacher. So let's jump into the 5 ways to engage students. Number 1, your attitude. You're probably thinking, this is not what I wanted or expected when I was listening to today's episode. I wanted an easy, implementable list of things. And I hear you. But think about this. Even if you create the best activity, if you don't have the right attitude or the other 4 things that I'm going to share, it may not work. And I don't want that for you. I want your time and energy to be respected within the classroom. One of my favorite books that I read this year was Engaging Students with Poverty in Mind by Eric Jensen. And he says in his book that engagement is both attitude and strategy. So we have to make a choice every day and every class period to engage our students. That attitude alone can make a huge difference. Trust me, my 6th period class is one of the hardest classes I've ever had. I constantly have the thought, I just need to make it through these 58 minutes. But how do you think that thought affects my energy towards my students? It hurts my ability to make a difference, and it causes my mindset to not want to make a difference. So attitude is the first way to engage your students. The second one is to build respect and relationships. There's this old saying, maybe not so old, I think it's by Ben Franklin though, which is why I said it was old. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's true in the classroom as well as inside of the entire world. Students will work harder for teachers that they like and respect. Plus, studies show students will behave better and feel more excited to learn when they respect and like their teacher. But how do you build relationships and respect? Here are my 2 tips for you. And you might have heard these before. Number one, share a little bit about yourself every day. So maybe just start with sharing a 1-minute story about your family or your pets or what you do outside of teaching, and allow your students in turn to share back with you. If you're having trouble getting started with this idea, one thing I like to do is when a student asks a random question in the middle of learning, I will take time to walk that tangent and share a little bit about myself. The second way that you can build respect and relationships with your students is respect your students. Treat them equitably and consistently. If you show inconsistent treatment towards your students as a whole, things will not progress positively. In addition, make sure that the words you use with them are kind and respectful. Students will mirror who you are to them, so be careful the words and attitudes you use. I remember one specific time in my 5th period class, maybe a month ago, I was super upset with some of the behaviors that I'd seen, and I let my emotions get the better of me. And so I pulled this student aside. Typically, we have a very amicable relationship, but I was mad and I did not control it well. And immediately I could see the shift in the student, and he mirrored that attitude back at me. So be careful with how you treat your students because they will mirror it back to you. All right. So the third way that you can increase engagement in your classroom is create buy-in. For those of you who wanted something tangible, this thought is for you. And it can be used with whatever activity you want. So whatever the activity, create a hook that pulls students in. That can look like making an activity a competition. I did this with my 5th period last week. I made our warm-up a competition. I told them that whoever could come up with the most written reasons for the which one doesn't belong we did, they would receive $10 in classroom currency. And as soon as I said, go, every student put their head down and scribbled away. It was beautiful. I had students who usually just do the bare minimum actually win this prize. They ended up getting, I think, 11 reasons for which one doesn't belong in the little activity. Another way you can hook students is by giving them a choice. Back in episodes 16 and 17, we talked about how the brain learns and retains information. And one of the neurotransmitters in your brain is dopamine, the feel-good hormone. So when students have a level of choice or the experience is enjoyable, their brain releases dopamine. And those neurotransmitters, like dopamine, carry the electrical messages across from synapse to synapse or neuron to each other. And those transmissions are crucial for your brain's capacity to process new information. So, giving that level of choice increases dopamine, making the experience enjoyable, and students then learn better and retain more information. So how can we include choice in the classroom? So offering 2 activities and letting students choose between them is a level of choice. And a lot of Teachers Pay Teachers resources come with a print and digital version. So even just asking students whether they would rather complete the print or the digital version is that buy-in. Or one of my favorite things to do is choose 5 problems from this worksheet to work on. Or I have students in the warm-up choose 2 of the 3 problems to complete. It doesn't have to be fancy. So moving into the 4th way to engage your students is to be clear and concise. The clearer the directions are, the higher your students' engagement will be. I use the exit directions on my slide to help with this. Not exit directions as in exit the classroom, but exit into the activity. If you've been a listener for a while, you've heard me talk about this idea. But on the slide, it includes what to do, how to do it, and where to do it. Plus, it also gives a visual with a timer of how long I have them to work on the activity and what to do when they're done. A lot of people kind of hate on the timer a little bit because it can cause anxiety, but I make sure I'm upfront with my students that this is just the amount of time I have in the lesson for us to work on it. It doesn't necessarily need to be done by the time the timer is up, but just to give you a timeline of when we are moving on as a class. And I'll change it depending on how students are doing, but it just is a visual to show them it's being clear and concise with our time. And overall, the exit directions have been a game changer for me. I remember my first year of teaching, before I implemented this idea, I would have students ask all the time, "What are we doing? What are we doing?" And the key is to always refer back to the exit directions or the slides when a student asks you this question, because it makes them an independent person or an independent learner, because they're not depending on you to give the information. You just turn and point. Or, what do you see up here? What does it say up there? Because you are directing them to where to look, and they can become independent later on. So, clear and concise. Hopefully that section was clear and concise. Anyway, moving on to the last one, number 5. Be passionate. You didn't become a teacher for the money or the fame. Or if you did, I'd love to know how much you make, because I certainly don't make that much. You became a teacher because you are passionate about it. Whether it's about making a difference, the subject you teach, or something else, passion is why you joined this career. So let your passion show. Energy is contagious, so make sure it's positive. Not toxically so, but make sure you are sincere and honest with your students. That alone can make the difference for your students' engagement. Another way to show your passion is to move around the classroom. Don't be still or concreted, rooted to the ground. Use your hands, tell stories, vary your voice level, use props, anything. I remember one of my English teachers back in high school, she used props all the time. And I can tell you that was one of my favorite classes of all time because of how engaging she was. So you have the power to change your classroom atmosphere, and it's inside of you. I know it can be tough, believe me. My 6th period gives me a run for my money every single day. But in the long run, I see that it is worth it. Even if I can just make the difference for one student, it's worth it for me and for my students. So I know today's episode was packed with a lot of information and maybe wasn't what you were anticipating when I was like 5 ways to engage your students. But if you have questions about it, please email me or send me a message on Instagram. I want to have a conversation with you. Or better yet, join my Facebook group for middle school math teachers, a fraction of math teachers. I'm all about those puns up in here. Anyway, it's a place for those who have students working below grade level but don't have a curriculum yet to support those students. You'll receive support, free tools to increase engagement, and a community of teachers who are in the same boat. So to recap today's episode, 5 ways to engage your students: your attitude, building relationships and respect, increasing buy-in, embrace clarity and be concise, and show your passion. And with that, as always, I'll calculator. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. To find all the links and resources to things talked about in this episode, head on over to MissKuipersClassroom.com and click on podcast.